Welcome everyone to the Earth Exchange Café. My name is Trebby Johnson, and I'm here with Harry Sams and our guest today for the cafe. So we invite you to really imagine that you are in a beautiful cafe, one of your favorite places, a place where you can always go to meet your friends, have interesting conversations, and a place that's surrounded by books and magazines, where there's music playing, but not so loudly that you have to shout your conversation, where there are beautiful things on the walls, paintings and photographs, and where you come not only to see the friends that you already know, but to meet new people and have interesting conversations with people that are doing interesting things to bring people's attention to the world, to the natural world, in all the different ways that it surrounds us, in ways that it's challenged, in ways that we have forgotten how to relate to it and are trying to learn again, and taking those ways and often transforming how we relate to places into quite extraordinary works of art. So hope you have your coffee or your tea or your chocolate today, or perhaps just a glass of water. And we will begin our conversation with our guest today, Elizabeth Poraj-Wilczynska. And to introduce her is Harry Sams.
Thanks, Trebby. Well, welcome everybody, and I'm so delighted to welcome Elizabeth. It's so nice to have you here. Thank you for doing this, Elizabeth.
I'm just so excited to be here. It's been a long time coming, Harry, and Trebby, thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming. And the first question I'm curious to know the answer to is how, when you were young, when you were growing up, how did you feel inspired to move towards the work that you do with the artistic work connecting to these ancient sacred sites in the landscape?
Well, it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll try and make it really short. I grew up with four brothers, and my parents were extraordinary. They were really, really open to all kinds of ideas about the world, and they never said, "Oh, there's no such thing as fairies. There's no such thing as gnomes," or anything like that. And my mum and dad were really interested in superstition and folklore. And my mother had grown up in East Anglia, where that is a tradition that is long established, and they were always talking about superstition and things like that. So that was in the background. But my brothers were always going to this place called Bella's Nap, and they were a bit older than me. So they were able to drive out or to ride out on their bikes and go to this place and then come back with fossils and bits of flint and things. And they just basically inspired a name in my mind. So Bella's Nap, where I worked, which is burial mound, Neolithic burial mound, was in my psyche for a really, really long time. And then later on, when I left school, I went to train as an archaeological illustrator for Crickley Hill Archaeological Trust. So I worked for them for a long time. So that's art, creating detailed drawings about finds from archaeological sites. And then I became the exhibition officer. And there was a job that nobody wanted. They did want it and they didn't want it. They had a huge bus, which they converted into an exhibition. It's an exhibition bus. And it was a 48-seater coach. And nobody really wanted to drive that very old bus. And I got the job somehow. And I was doing some amazing work taking this extraordinary exhibition about Crickley Hill, which is a Neolithic, Iron Age and Dark Age site, all around Britain. So it was an incredible job. And also, our drawing office had all these wonderful artists working there. And it was a time of innovation. So I wanted to make that exhibition really live. I wanted children to be able to try pottery, to be able to do weaving, spinning, corn grinding, all those things. So the artists were very much involved in creating that exhibition. So I suppose that was the first time when I really thought about art and archaeology. And then sometime after that, I worked for City Excavations and went on in Gloucestershire, working on lots and lots of sites. And then I ended up at Crickley Hill itself, as an assistant warden, so nothing to do with the archaeology at the time. So I was doing land management, which was about how we put the land back together after it's been excavated, which is very interesting because the whole of the hill fort had been stripped off by the archaeologist, but it was a triple SI, site of special scientific interest. So it's all got to go back and be preserved for the future. So there's a bit of taking everything away, putting it back, and that really interested me greatly. And then for a while after that, I continued in archaeology, and then I had my family, and I moved to the Cotswolds, and I was a therapist, so a complementary therapist, basically specializing in holistic therapy for dementia. And then my mum got poorly. She came to live with us, and I needed to find another way to work. And I thought, right, we're living really near a Neolithic burial mound. I'm going to visit that site as often as I can. But the only time I could really visit it was at night. So by visiting at night, I had a whole new concept of what the mound was about, this dark, inviting space. I suddenly got really interested in what would happen if you visited a site for a whole year in the darkness at night and during the daytime, and what would be revealed. So that's when my archaeology really started to move into art, and I wanted to create an exhibition about that. And I thought I'd be finished in about 6 months. But actually, it's, I think, some 22 years later, I still seem to be there.
Yeah,
so that's
wow.
how it kind of all came together. But it was just a name in my psyche, Bella's Nap, for a long, long time.
I'm curious about, what you said about being a holistic therapist, and that this sort of entry into the deeper aspect of what it's like to be connected to heritage. And, I know you a little bit now over the last few years, and I'd love you to sort of describe how the sort of spiritual aspects have come up for you, and how do you work with that in your artistry?
Well, I think that the deeper relationship didn't happen immediately. It took a long time, probably about 6 to 8 months, when I began to feel a real connection with the monument, and to actually feel a conversation starting. So I might arrive and think, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this, but then the site seemed to be saying something to me, saying, well, actually, I don't think that's a very good idea. Why don't you go over here? Or a cloud would come over at that point, and I'd be seeing a different aspect of the landscape in the shadow. And the combination of a feeling of someone else talking to me on that monument made me move in different ways around the monument itself. But the main thing was that year of being on the land, and that meant that I was actually sleeping there at night. So I had 2 camps by the end of it, a winter camp and a summer camp, where I would stay for several weeks at a time in that land, really immersing myself. And it wasn't until I did that then all these voices started to talk, the animal voices, the plant voices, stone ancestors, and the bones and skeletons from within the mound, obviously now in museums and scattered to the winds. They've been taken out many, many years ago. They're not where they should be. And the feeling of disappointment and sadness of that was quite great. So I wanted to do something that would honour them and perhaps put them back in the landscape in some way. So I started to create work that felt as if they were actually instructing me what to do. That's how it felt.
That's incredible. That shift, having also been a professional archaeologist, and how dry that can be. And there's this extractive, transactional relationship with the past, which is, well, I excavate it and I put it into boxes and I describe it, and then that's it. But what you're talking about is full immersion into something that is, it is warm, it's living, it's vibrant, it's collective. And it's still there. And you being able to have that relationship with it, and you turning up shifts completely what you're talking about. You're not talking about archaeology, are you? You're talking about something else.
Yeah, you're talking about the spirit of the place, the life of the place, which continues hundreds of years or thousands of years after it was originally, created. Yeah.
And I suppose part of it was that the excavations that had taken place in the 1860s and the 1930s and had removed so much made that the archaeology at the site was not pure anymore. It was not a pure site. It's been reconstructed in the 1930s and put back really, really well, we believe. But my project then turned into, so what's special about this place? What is it that made them choose this place? If we can't look at the archaeology as being completely original, then this place is not, it's pretty much the same space. So what can we learn if we spend a lot of time walking the land, understanding what makes this place tick? Where does the wind come from? How do the animals use this site? What plants grow here? And yes, it's not the same as it was in the Neolithic, but the feels and the contours of places speak. And that's what I was looking for.
So what did the land tell you, or what did you discover about why Bellisnap is where it is?
Well, there's so many things, Trebi. I don't know where to start. But the one thing that really stands out is the weather. And Bellisnap has a microclimate. It's at the top of a very steep hill. It has a very steep slope right next to it. So it's right on the edge of a very flat land and then a very steep slope. And that creates extraordinary weather because the weather travels up through the valley and then it hits the edge of the scarp and the warm air rises and rolls over on itself and causes a lot of storms, a lot of humidity. So it's a place of storms and clouds and extraordinary beautiful cloud formations. And there is a wind corridor as well that takes the clouds in a particular way on most of the time. So we have a prevailing wind of the west and the southwest, and then we have an unusual wind, which is the north wind. And when that is blowing, the chambers sing. So it's a bit like blowing over the top of a bottle, that woo sound, that deep sound.
Yeah.
If you are at Bellisnap or in the chambers when the north wind is blowing, and the chambers were open at a time when burials were being put inside, then you would hear that deep sound, and it's really mesmeric. So lots of different reasons, but storms, the wind, and the fact that migratory animals use that space. We get a lot of migratory birds because it's the last place where they can come and feed before they move down the estuary. It's a flat land. It's also very high, but it's quite waterlogged. So it's a good place for animals to come to drink. So that would make them a good place for hunting as well. And there are some extraordinary fossils there. And that is something that fascinates me. They're really large. And the whole of the field next to Bellisnap has a lot of different fossils in it, different shapes, different kinds. But one particular tract has really large snail type shells. And the more I looked at them and the more I saw them, I realized that every time Neolithic man dug into the ground, these were coming to the surface. And they felt like mothers. They felt like Earth Mother statues. So I was seeing them more as an art form. Who knows what they would have thought or made of them, but they have a femaleness about them, and they have this warmth about them. So I was looking at lots of different things. So the fossils are particularly special there. They're really large and unusual. And we also have stones with holes in. And some of those have been incorporated into the barrow. And one in particular on the east side of the barrow is the blocking stone. The stone that would have shut the chamber has a very strange circular hole in it. So you could look through into the world of the dead.
Oh.
So there's many things about that landscape, and I'm learning more all the time.
And I think just to sort of play devil's advocate a little bit, and bearing in mind that people will be listening who may say, well, if it's not been put back, it's been put back according to what people think it might be, and there's burials, bones in museums. How can you be sure that what you're picking up is not projections onto a romantic idea of what could be the perfect burial site. So can you tell us a little bit about why connecting to the land you think has sort of mitigated that kind of reconstructionism at all?
That's a really interesting question, a really deep question. I think obviously there's lots of people which will discount what I've said. And I think that it's only by being in that landscape for a long time and noticing these things over and over again that they become deeply embedded within your psyche when you're noticing it. But it may be that none of these things are important at all. It could be something completely different. But I think that a lot of these things are deeply spiritual. And when you experience a huge storm over the mound, and you can imagine the ancestors maybe seeing that lightning coming down on a regular basis at this place, attracted perhaps to discharge near water, which is unusual on the high hill to have that water base, which we have. Maybe that was seen as a ladder to the higher realms, and the sound that you get there echoes through the whole of the valley. And we also get this deep sound from the north wind running through the forest and wood of Humblebee Wood, and it sounds like a voice talking to you. So there are many ways that it could be construed that the site talks back a lot of the time, or that there are things that regularly happen. And that's just my take on it.
Yes, and also what I'm really interested in is what you said about the animals, that you're bringing it right to the sort of the non-humans. It's not necessarily about the ancestors. There's something in what you're saying about if you spend a year at a site, you get to know the badger tracks, you get to know the deer, where they jump the fences. You do get to hear where the rain falls and how the wind moves. So there's a presence to your experiences, as well as it being an exploration into the past. And I'm wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about, what's the work that you've done over the years that have helped you look at it from different angles? I know that you're an archaeographer, so you can maybe explain to us what that is or how you've expanded on that, but also your academic work, anything that you'd like to share about what helps you make sense of or tell the story of Bellasnap.
I think sharing it is a very important part of it, not keeping it all to myself, to talking to lots of people. And I've had amazing mentors over the years who have given their time and their effort, seeing the interest in the project itself. They've come in and made a big difference to it. But I've been very interested in how people feel when they come to the site. And presence has been a very important part. When do you feel within presence of the monument? When does something change within you? Is it when you're driving to the site in your car? Is it when you're walking there? Is it different when you walk? Is it different when you drive? How near do you have to be before you feel within the presence of something greater than yourself at these monuments? And what is it that the monument actually provides for us? Because I've met so many people. Obviously, the Bellasnap is on the Cotswold Way. There are hundreds of people traveling through that landscape all the time. And they all stop and they sit and they spend time there generally. So a lot of them I've made relationships with, and they have said that it makes them feel well to be there. So is it just being in the landscape, or is it being within the presence of something older, something ancient, and being able to touch that stone and being able to connect on a very deep spiritual level? So the work that I'm doing at the moment is talking to people who have quite profound illnesses, and they still feel that they need to come to Bellasnap on a regular basis to maintain their health. There's something about it that is making them feel really well. And that's been fascinating, that kind of work. But also earlier in the project, way back in 2007, I met Tom Graves, he would describe himself as a Confucianist. But he's basically someone who works with business systems within big organizations. But he also wrote an incredible book called Needles of Stone, which looked about the ways that we sense when we're in the countryside, the way that we sense monuments and the ancient past and what is beneath our feet. And he was a dowser, and he helped me to get into dowsing, understand how to find water is the main thing that most people think you can do with dowsing. But you can also find archaeology, you can find gemstones, you can find coal, you can find all kinds of minerals dowsing, and dowsing's been used for thousands of years. It's not a great thing to talk to an archaeologist about, because mainly archaeologists are not keen on dowsing, but that's something that I think is opening up a little bit now. And we're looking at more and more ways of understanding places. So through our extrasensory perception, even, what are we doing and how are we sensing it in the landscape is very interesting to me, and how we turn it into art.
Yeah, and I want to focus on your art and see some of your art.
Yes, can
I
you
know
share?
you're prepared to do that. Well, and I just want to mention one of the things that struck me when I was looking at your work about Bellisnap, the work inspired by Bellisnap, was how it's such an extraordinary merging of what the place looks like, how you're perceiving it, and something else, something greater than that.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting. It's a huge site. It's a huge mound, and it's very difficult to form a relationship with it because there's so many parts of it, the front, the sides, the end. And when I first started, I started treating it as if it was an animal, a skittish horse. I'd come up to it and stroke the side of it, and then say, "I'm here. I hope it's okay. I'm going to be working here today." But then that changed to, "Can you show me what you want me to see? What is it that you want me to see within this landscape?" And then I would walk in the landscape and eventually find something, find all kinds of things. Like I might find an artifact, and I was absolutely shocked by the number of artifacts I did find, like flint scrapers, arrowheads, in the field, using dowsing, but also talking to the barrow to direct me into the areas where it might want me to go. Because that field has been field walked very, very thoroughly over the years by many different archaeological people. And I've been told there'd be nothing left there. And yet we found a huge number of artifacts. And that really is a wonderful thing when you're wandering aimlessly and you suddenly find a beautiful, beautiful piece of flint. And it really speaks to you. That last person to hold it was probably a Neolithic person who made it. That's a direct contact.
So what do you do with those pieces that you found? Do you leave them? What happens to them?
So they've all been correlated and logged onto the Sites and Monuments Register, so people know where they came from. And also they have a GPS. So I use a GPS to make a waymark, which gives me a direction and the position exactly of every piece that is found. And that is very important if you want your work to go further. Otherwise, just leave it in the field where you found it. And I do actually have some pieces at home that are maybe not museum worthy. And I fully intend to put them back in the earth. On my death, they will be back in Bellisnap.
Yes, there's something wonderful about the way you're merging what I would call cold data and warm data.
Yeah.
The cold data is the finds, the GPS, even the weather patterns. They're sort of like, these are the cold bits of pixelated data, but the warm data is like how that makes you feel, the sleeplessness, the dreams maybe that come, the voices of the ancestors or the rock or the badger, and then creating the art from that kind of merging. And I'm just going to go through the pictures and you tell me where to stop, but as I go through, please just describe or explain what we're seeing. That would be really helpful and help us understand more about your creations.
Well, this is the portal area. So you have 4 stones in a H kind of setting in the middle, and then a forecourt, an area we call the forecourt, with the very fine dry stone walling along the outside, and then the mound, which would probably have been a lot higher than it is today. And it most probably would have had stone a stone covering, not a lovely grass on the top. So it would have looked aquiline and amazing. And this is a picture of how I perceive that H setting in moonlight, because it's very probable, according to Professor Darville, who's written so much about the barrows of the Cotswolds, this may have been a portal dolmen. So it predates the Neolithic barrow. So before the barrow was ever built, these 4 stones were probably in the landscape. And at that point, the moon would have been able to shine straight through it. And it would have been a really interesting space between those stones, where everything energetic could flow through.
So the actual door that we see was in itself a portal before the mound, before anything
It's
that was
probably a
abutting
portal
it.
dolmen. Yeah, there on its own. And now, when it's incorporated into the mound, it is not an entrance, it is a false entrance. But I see it as a spirit door, because in the centre there was a very large jawbone found, resting just in the centre of the stones, and that is from the Neolithic, after it had been made into a barrow. But that to me is where the ancestors speak from.
Well, that's
So it's
interesting,
human
because
jaw.
I was in Egypt recently, and in the ancient Egyptian tombs, there's what's called a spirit door, and
Wow.
it's where the soul comes forth. You know, human beings can't go in and out of it, but it's where the spirits go in and out. So perhaps it's the same idea.
Wow.
That's very interesting. I just felt that. This
Wow.
is a piece of work about the cosmology of what I was experiencing with the fossils, and some of the flint finds around the bottom, the ring of stones, flint finds, tools and artifacts made by Stone Age people. But the arc across the top are echinoid fossils. So they're like sea urchins, and I've used them as moons and moon phases, traveling over the barrow in the center, which I made of stone, limestone. So I carved that over a period of a number of weeks when I was sleeping and living next to the mound. And during that time, I was listening to the birds. I was seeing the weather change. I was feeling inspired to create it by something other. And I feel that obviously there's a large part of me in that, but there's also, for me, a large part of the site within that piece of stone in the middle. It represents the barrow, but it also represents the anchor that the barrow represents for us all. So I think that these monuments bring us together to think about the past, to remember, maybe even to forget when we're there. But they are an anchor within the landscape, and I think they're spiritual anchors for us, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And to the left side, there are holes.
Sorry.
That's okay. Stones with holes as well. So it's a whole cosmology based upon my experiences and the things that I've been shown by the barrow.
So just to clarify, those stones with holes are human-made holes, rather than hag stones that you might find on the beach that have got, you know, bored limestone.
They are a kind of hagstone, if you like to call them that. They're natural, so they're probably caused by roots going through mud in the Jurassic period, many years before.
Oh,
yeah,
that's fascinating. Okay,
so this is Humblebee Wood, and Bellasnap means beacon hill. The words mean beacon hill, and I saw that as maybe a beacon where there were fires lit for the solstice and maybe for the equinoxes, to honour the sun. But I also saw it as a place where the sun goes down. And at Bellasnap, there's a terrific sunset over the Malverns. And if you view that sunset from the other side of the valley, you get a kind of double sunburst. So for me, it is a place of fire and sun. And that's what this painting is about.
it's very, very, the movement, there's a tree that looks like an ent, you know, the one that's just to the right of the sun, like it's slinking away after it's set the fire and it's just off.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you mentioned that, because during the whole time that I was doing the last 20 years, there have been 3 particular trees that I go and see on a regular basis. And only last year in the gales which we had, they've all fallen. So they've been with me for 20 years. And when I went into the wood and saw that they had gone, actually fallen, my first thought was, oh gosh, how am I going to get into the sky? And I suddenly realized that they were the portal for things that I was thinking about above. And they were my friends who were helping me to understand the sky, the night sky, the stars, the moon, and everything. It was the way I hadn't actually thought about it like that, but that was what it was when I saw them down.
Yeah, gosh. Yeah, yeah. That's
Oh, now this is about death practices, the practices of mortuary tables. So at the front, we've got some tables with what looks like a body on it, perhaps. And we know that the bodies are not necessarily put straight into a mound. They're left out for excarnation so that the body decomposes within the landscape on a high table, a bit like they do in India. And this was about that journey, or how the body changes while it's on a mortuary table, how it would have gone from something recognizable, might have been bound up, but recognizable, to something completely different and changing. And this would have been probably a taboo place to go to. You wouldn't have wanted to hang around near the barrow. There'd have been smells and sights, and it would have been a fearful place. So probably not somewhere where we'd be living. And then in the background, it's the chamber illuminated with perhaps a shaman going inside. But it's really about the body and the spirit traveling through its landscape that it knows and understands.
I'm really taken by what you've said about how the place itself can be taboo, shunned, rejected from ordinary, everyday sort of living experience, and how death is, in its starkest forms, is a very scary, complex process, and how a site that we may like to visit on our days off, that we like to sit and have well-being experiences at, which you've mentioned, there's a place for death as well. There's a place for the taboo, the unsayable, the unthinkable. And I wonder whether that's something that is present for you in the way that you talk about how well-being can be improved when people visit the site.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to reflect upon the past there and what has actually happened there, and to respect it as a grave, which we tend to not do these days. There's no real evidence of bones or anything. We read the little piece of information there, but it is a burial site, and I think we need to maybe put something back into the landscape that helps that. But maybe it's so subtle and so known and felt by us when we're there that we don't need to do that. But I think for our own well-being, to reflect on the past and what has happened there is, as you say, it's a taboo subject. And yet in the Neolithic, it was very much part of life.
And in fact, it was illuminated. If it was a place of illumination and the brightness of the Bellas,
Yeah,
then there's something about that, about being very open, very exposed, and very visible.
absolutely.
Mm.
So this is about the site being damaged, actually, because people do have parties up there. They do create fires, and this was the ash from a fire. And it took a long time for that fire site to end up like this. And then I just used the ash to create some concentric circles to feel like it was the center of settlement. And the white dot in the middle was the aspect of center of settlement. So it's turning something that is very negative into something that perhaps the Stone Age people would understand. And it reminded me a little bit of rock art as well.
Mm.
So
It's also like what with Radical Joy for Hard Times, which is our organization. It's devoted
right.
to finding and making beauty in hard places. So what
Yeah.
you've done is that. I mean, you took a casual, I would say disrespectful presence there and created beauty out of what was out of the damage.
I would hope so. And it's now disappeared completely. It's not there. But for while it was there, it looked a little bit better. I think.
I wonder if you could share a little bit about the circles of energy at that place, because when we were up there was these swirls. So when I look at that, it's like, for just this moment in time, something that was damaging and disrespectful has given a canvas upon which to actually expose the things that you were picking up in dowsing. So there's actually something about just temporarily, which will it disappears in the end, it's ephemeral, it's gone. But yeah, it's just like there's layers upon layers of creation and meaning.
Yeah, I really find that really important. And the things that I do make there that are made out of natural things, for example, it snowed, and myself and a friend made a really large woman out of snow on top of the mound. We didn't go there with anything in mind. We just traveled to the mound. There was nobody up there, and we made a really tall snow sculpture of a woman, a pregnant woman, actually, on top of the mound. And then at the end of 3 or 4 days, the sun started to melt it. But at the end of each day, it turned from white to a beautiful glowing orange as the sun hit it across the valley, and then it melted away and disappeared. So things that are there and then absorbed back into the earth. It was like a seed from the sky had gone down into the earth, and I found that very powerful. So if I do make things, I often make things out of brambles and all kinds of grasses, quite large sculptures. They then get taken away and disseminated back into the landscape, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And that's really essentially what the Earth Exchange ritual itself is, taking what is there, making something beautiful, and then allowing it to just be dispersed over time in whatever way nature sees fit to do it.
Right.
Yeah, it's really powerful that you're doing it at a site that has just got this continuous narrative of story for so long. So what's this one?
So this is the way that the chamber on the west side is illuminated on the equinox. So the autumn equinox, you've got the sun coming across, and you can see it's really orange inside that chamber.
Yeah.
It's really bright. And I think until you go there and you start living in the landscape, you don't really appreciate the beauty of that light and how powerful it is against the limestone. Because if that whole mound had been covered with limestone, the whole thing would be glowing like that for a time until it weathered in. But now it's still a pretty impressive place to find something really pure, the light being so pure.
Yeah. Wow. Talking
And
about
this is about the equinox on the other side. So this is the chamber on the east side, and the fact that there's something called the shimmer that we've called the shimmer. My son and I have made a lot of films about the sun entering the chamber and leaving the chamber, and then moving on to the next chamber and leaving the chamber. In the early spring, it moves along the barrow, and then in the wintertime, it starts to move back again. So it's the movement of the sun and the light of the moon as well, and how they affect the barrow. But it creates all kinds of shadows and strange presences, if you like. And sometimes those feel benevolent, and sometimes they feel a bit fearsome. So we've just been spending a lot of time filming and photographing how the sun and the moon affect the light within the chambers.
goodness.
Oh, now this one was really interesting for me because I instinctively one day decided to make a kind of pottery out of mud from the field right next to the mound. And originally that mud would probably have come from the mound because it's a lot smaller than it was. So taking mud and creating a sort of pot and pot shapes, and then putting flint inside it, because something about dwelling in that environment made me feel that the flint was as important as a waste flake as it was as a tool, and that maybe it was gathered up and put in particular places or honoured in a way as a waste flake as much as it was when it is actually made into something. And so the first one on the left has got a piece of barley inside it, so it's honouring barley and creating a home for it. And this piece of work is called vessels, so it's homes for these things to dwell within. And then later on, I found that the people from Belesnap were actually making unfired pots as well. So I was just following in a tradition of using that earth in that way, which I really love because it just came instinctively. This is a mound next to Belesnap, which is no longer there. So we're talking about the land being ravaged or changed or just destroyed. and this has been completely destroyed, so it doesn't even exist. So next to Bella's Knap, there was a Bronze Age barrow. So much, much later in time, people were still coming to that area, and it was deemed still to be a special place for some reason by a completely different culture, Bronze Age culture or late Neolithic culture, to create a large round mound. But that has now been completely removed by ploughing. So what you see is only part of the story when you go to Bella's Knap now. And when you dig into the earth, when they were making these mounds, on the Cotswolds, the soil is very fertile, it's very shallow. So what happens is that plants, wildflowers and beautiful flowers spring up immediately. So I was interested in what they would have made of that fertility, that sudden fertility, and whether they would have seen it as flower spirits coming out of the earth and understanding the underworld. This is a bit of a homage to round barrows and other monuments within the environment which are no longer there. So there are lots of pits that we can no longer see. There are no longer the round barrows and long barrows. There are no longer a lot of the contours of the Neolithic visible. They may be there below the land, but they've been obliterated. So this is a piece of sculpture talking about things that are no longer.
Wow.
This piece of work has Bella's Knap in the very distance as a sort of greeny blur. And then the forefront is that round barrow that we were talking about. It has a mound covered by another mound, and then the spirits of the ancestors below. And whether they thought by putting their urns within the barrow and their cremations within that, whether they were going down into a world below that round barrow, where they would mingle with plant spirits, plant ancestors, stone ancestors. And to the left, for me, there's the sun moving out of the mound. Obviously, I think it's an important place because of the setting sun. They've put it there so it catches the sunlight at the equinoxes. And then we have a very small blurry bird just coming out of the land, which is, for me, the spirit of place. Because if you go to Bella's Knap today, you will hear the skylark incessantly. And that is, for me, the sound of Bella's Knap.
Wow. This is extraordinary.
Yeah, yeah.
Really extraordinary.
I'm really taken by this thread of the art, the spirit of place from what no longer exists. I think that there's something so poignant about that. And in fact, it does tie with what we were saying about the reconstruction of Bella's Knap, this kind of like what still remains when the blueprint is no longer there, when we've destroyed, but have we,
Yeah.
I just find that really fascinating. I'm conscious of time.
Sure. Now this looks a little harsh, but it is one of the skulls from Bella's Knap, and I wanted to put it back in its landscape. So I created a photo montage with humblebee wood. So those strands running through the skull are humblebee wood trees from that environment. And then the mound in the background and the sky. So I just wanted to put them back, even if it was just in a photograph.
Wow. Yeah. It is reminding me that it is a place of ancestral worship, and that we that's where people put their dead, because as somebody said, they wouldn't want to put their dead in a scary place where they wouldn't feel comforted, where they wouldn't belong. You want to put your dead, your family, where they will be tended and cared for. And actually for you to be replacing them back into that, even in a photograph, feels actually very touching, very moving.
Well, I'd spent some time with the skulls in Cheltenham Museum, and I really did feel a great sadness from them. And that has been said by a number of people that have worked with them. And I just really felt that was necessary to try and do.
There's definitely a conversation to be had there, isn't there? There's been some work recently about human remains and them being exhibited, and whether we're doing the right thing, essentially, whether ancestral respect and reverence is more than having people walk around a museum and seeing a collection of bones with an interesting little plaque to tell you what's about. It's actually about returning them to land. So yes, it may be a conversation for another time, but it definitely is important to be conscious of what we do and how we interact with our ancestors.
I think so, very powerfully for me. So this is the Sisters Long Barrow that Professor Tim Darvill from Bournemouth University has been digging for a number of years, and we had been working together at Bella's Knap and at Sisters, looking at different ways of sensing the barrow. So the very first thing that happened before the barrow was excavated, or they started work on it, was a dowsing survey. And that dowsing survey, it was felt that there were burials within it. And I think that that's really important, that an archaeologist was interested to be able to be open enough. Tim was such a fantastic gentleman, archaeologist, really, sadly not with us any longer, but to be open to all kinds of sensing the land. And this is a picture of that barrow as it just became opened up.
That's extraordinary. Tim was one of our guests, wasn't he, Trebi, in 2023, August, I think it was. And he was a very, very intriguing, interesting person who very much is working with bringing wounded heritage or heritage of all kinds back into consciousness in a much more healing and wholesome way for modern humans. So yeah, he's
and there was a sentence, you and Tim Darvill wrote a chapter together in a book called Art in the Archaeological Imagination. And there was a sentence towards the beginning of it that I just thought was really wonderful. And you said, the two of you wrote it together. There are no subjects and objects in the traditional sense, no explanations or interpretations, rather a series of intersections between constructed understandings, cosmologies, culture, nature, and the supernatural.
That is absolutely summing up the work. That's probably what you should have read at the front at the very beginning of everything, because that sums up everything that really my work entails. Mm-hmm. And he was so open to it and so encouraging to continue that kind of work. So it's a great loss for British archaeology and international archaeology. He's sadly not with us anymore, but hopefully this work, which I think is so important, will continue.
Yeah, I agree. Are we at, we got a couple more.
Yeah, we got 10 more minutes or so.
So just to sum up what the work that Tim and I were doing at Sisters was looking at perhaps a slightly different way of interpreting the archaeology. And it came from, again, dwelling at the site, being at the site at different times of day and looking and just sitting with the stones of the mound and the monument. And what really came across in this picture, I hope, is you may see some human forms within that. And I really felt that it was perhaps the placing of stones and the original intention to find the right stones, to have a relationship with those stones. So it was the placing of stones for their own sake and the choosing of those stones by individuals that are as important as the whole mound itself, or as part of it. So there's tiny building blocks. The stone creates the bigger mound, but it was the relationship that people had with stone, and maybe stone ancestors, and the way they looked at these things as being integral to their own well-being, perhaps, and their own wider world. So choosing a stone to put into a monument. So that's what that painting is about.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That definitely resonates with other studies, doesn't it? You know, with Newgrange in Ireland's a particular example where all of that beautiful quartz at the front was when it was excavated, it had all fallen onto the ground, and there's a theory that each one of them was brought by a person to collectively mark with the brightness of quartz the experience of actually being there, whether they had relatives in that mound or not. There was something collective and collaborative about the community experience. And I love the idea that it isn't just what we're so used to in the modern world, the idea that we have a contract and an architect and it's just basically people who are paid to put up a building. But actually, in the past, we're talking about communities devoting their time to actually pay attention to the buildings themselves, contributing to them.
That's interesting. Very, very interesting.
So what's this one?
So this is when Sisters Long Barrow was excavated, or it's not finished yet. They visit every year and do a little bit more, but the mound was deconstructed, so archaeology is destruction, but we've actually created another mound out of all the debris and all the mound substance. So this is the spoil heap, basically.
It's the what?
Heap, all the soil that's come off the mound as it's stripped back layer by layer is sieved and looked at for artifacts, and then it's dumped in a spoil heap. So we've actually created another mound, and I find that really fascinating, that out of one thing of destruction, we've now created something new, which has its own presence and its own feelings, but it's mingled with us and how we've excavated. So it's this sort of synergy between us, the past and the present, in a new form.
Wow.
And this one, I think this is the last one. And dwelling at the Sisters, they have a number of, around the outside, it has some large Cotswold stone quarry pits, which provided the stone for the mound, most probably. And as I was standing there taking photographs of this quarry pit, and my shadow was inside the quarry pit, and I was really dwelling within that space, which is perhaps the spirited place, the Neolithic ancestors' place. It's where they've excavated themselves, and now I'm standing within it in my shadow form. I was aware of the fact that when we strip back the archaeology, it's almost a performance, and for a short time we're letting out of the ground that particular presence, that moment of intention when they created the whole mound themselves. So it's almost like that spiritual moment where the past and the present meet. But I was also thinking of the time when the barrow is completely excavated, there is nothing left of it, and we've just got a stain of earth on the outline of it on the earth. And for me, that is the most powerful moment, because it's the moment of intention to build. That is the setting out. You can see the shape that they intended to make, and it is that intention to go into the land from such ancient people is traveling to us. So when there's nothing left, there is actually all that intention. And I find that perhaps the most important part.
So, Elizabeth,
Well,
I'm curious
share.
about one thing. I'm curious. So you have this very intense, complex, creative, spiritual relationship with these ancient sites. And do you have that kind of sensibility when you go to other places that aren't necessarily so ancient and so humanly built upon?
That's very interesting, because there is a site just by a place called GCHQ in Britain, which is government headquarters, and next to that there's been some stones, a modern sculpture which looks like Neolithic sculpture. It's very, very good. It's made by Gordon Young, the famous artist, and he's put the stones in the landscape right next to this huge government headquarters listening place, and they're called the Listening Stones. But they have their own presence, and I think it's to do with the makeup of the stones themselves. And they are glacial erratics. They're stones that travel in the glacier from where they originated to another place. They've moved in the landscape, and I think they have a terrific power to them, granite and stones like that. So I do think that it is perhaps the makeup of places, the kinds of stones that are there, where I really connect. But some places that don't have any stones at all, I think that every place has its spiritual place, whether it is populated by the ancients, or it is a plant place, or an animal place, or a watery place, or a sky place. It's just a matter of staying there long enough to listen and hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to come sort of full circle. There's something you said earlier at the beginning. You asked yourself some questions. When I look at people, and I think, does coming here help your well-being? You mentioned some of your work. I mean, what's your conclusion about that? Do you really genuinely see that that just being at a place helps with feelings of being okay with the world. And then this spirit of place, this ancestral connection that you've tapped into, have you noticed that affects even deeper, perhaps, people's sense of well-being?
I think that people do feel well, because they have a sense of connection to something greater than themselves, and especially at sites where there are stones which you can actually touch and really touch and become immersed in a chamber, or go inside, or like at Avebury where you can really get it up close to the stones, Stonehenge, burial mounds. I think it is a place, lots of places really give you that feeling of something other, which is perhaps something we might have had from churches years ago, but now maybe we're going out into the countryside to experience it. And I think that some people really rely on going to those places. And I do believe that there is an energy at some of these spots, which is, maybe it is ancestors layered and layered and layered of energy, of intention in that land, positive intention, hopefully. But in many places, it's not a positive intention. So I don't know why that would be. But something about the energetics, and possibly it's about water, because we have always been able to find water in the past. I'm sure that animals can find water. I think we've got our senses dulled down, and that we used to be able to find it for ourselves. Our senses in our body will tell us where we're near to water, maybe the sense of smell under the ground. But I think that maybe a lot of places it's about feeling electromagnetism or energy in the landscape, maybe from stones or water, or from natural aspects that are concentrated in a place. And when you've got a monument on top of that as well, so the natural world in conjunction with monuments and intention, I think it's a number of different things, maybe many things.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, just to, maybe we're coming to the end, personally, do you feel that Bella Snap has been beneficial for your well-being and your personal sense of joy, happiness, being at peace?
I think it's been a tremendous gift to have so much time to have spent in a place. And for me, it is very difficult to say what it actually is to me. Tim Darville once asked me, so what is it? Is it male or female? These people that you're speaking to, is the mound male or female? And I said really quickly, without thinking about it, it's male, female, and animal. And so there's this difficult relationship with it. I don't really know what it is, but whatever it is, it's really a teacher. It's a teacher. It's somewhere I go, and I am constantly learning in a very beautiful, gentle way, and having really beautiful experiences. Sometimes not always beautiful, sometimes fearful. And interestingly, in lockdown, in COVID times, I was at the site, sleeping there during some of it, and we hadn't got any planes in the sky. We didn't have any travel going on. Everything was very, very silent. And one of the most unnerving times for me was when I was sat in the woods, and there was total silence, and I was just listening to the birds in the background, and I heard all these things that I hadn't heard before. Like, I don't know what it was really. Magnification of the trees in the wind, bird sounds, creatures. There was just so much more than I was hearing. I was actually unnerved by it, and everything became supernatural. It was as if the natural world understood that we weren't around, and it was coming out. And certainly through COVID, animals and creatures that don't usually come near the barrow were coming right up to it and onto it and around it. So something happened, and that's gone away again now. But
what an experience. Spine tingling, just you telling us. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for everything that you've shared. There's so many more conversations to be had, I'm sure, but thank you for this hour. It's been so insightful and interesting sharing with you, and I will take a lot from what you've shared. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I hand it over to you, Trebi, to close the cafe.
Elizabeth Poraj-Wilczynska, thank you so much. and you do have a website, which we will put, we'll put your website up on the radicaljoy.org website along with a copy of this conversation. And I invite, well, first of all, I want to say Earth Exchange Cafe, as it has existed for the last 5 years, is going to stop after March. There may be, yes, Harry and I both are being pulled in other directions for various reasons. And there may be other people from Radical Joy for Hard Times taking over in the future. But for right now, our March 26th conversation will be the last that she and I will do together, at least as we're imagining it. And our guest then will be Sophia Laine, who is a remarkable, she was the academic of the year in Finland, and she works with young people and clowning and gardening to cope with environmental problems. So please join us then. And we say now goodbye from Earth Exchange Cafe for this particular time. The music in the cafe has stopped. Your coffee, your tea, your cups are empty, and the books and magazines are being put back on the shelves. So you move your chair back, you say goodbye to the others, to your friends, to new people that you've met, and you leave and look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.